Hey guys, how's it going? Welcome back to another video and welcome to my full NextAuth course for NextAuth version 5 and above and Next.js version 15 and above. In this video, I'll take you guys through the latest versions of both libraries and teach you guys step by step on how to set up authentication in your Next.js app. I'm not going to waste any time. We'll start from a fresh Next.js project. We'll configure NextAuth for seamless authentication with GitHub, and I'll teach you guys how to protect your pages using a middleware so that you're only able to access certain pages if you've signed in into your application. NextAuth is one of the best solutions for authentication in Next.js, and I know a lot of people are having difficulties with it because of its new version. So I wanted to make this video so that everyone can get up to date. Before we get into the video, if you could leave a like and subscribe, this is the best way you guys can support the channel. It's like telling YouTube that you want to watch more of my videos. So I don't ask for money. If you guys just want to support me, that's the best way. So if you guys could do that, I would massively appreciate it. And also, if you want to check out the code for this video, it's all going to be in the description. So you can check that out as well. So without further ado, let's get into the video. Okay, everyone. So let's get started. As you can see, I already have an app here built with Next.js. These are the packages that are the version of the packages I'm using in case you want to check to see if it's similar or the same for you. As you can see, we are using Next 15, and this tutorial is specifically for Next 15 and for the NextAuth library version 5 and above, because this is where I see a lot of people getting confused due to the variety of different changes to the library and to its integration in Next.js. So to actually start off, we need to install the NextAuth package and we need to install its new version. So let's write npm install NextAuth, and we'll put at beta because the NextAuth version 5, it's at a beta release, so we do need to put that. But it's in a way stable, so I wouldn't mind adding it to your project. I'm going to save this, and let's come over here and create our .env.local file. This file is where we're going to put all of our environment variables directly from our auth secret, which is going to be a secret string, which is going to hold information about our authentication system, but also all of our environment variables related to GitHub OAuth, which is what we're going to be using as a method of authenticating in the beginning of the video. Now, the first environment variable we need is the auth secret. And it's just, like I said, a random string combined with characters and numbers, I believe. And a nifty way for you to generate it is actually by just running npx auth secret. And if you don't have the auth library, this will automatically install for you, but it will generate this auth secret, which you'll be able to use in your authentication system. Now, the next things we need is we need the auth underscore GitHub ID. And we'll also need the auth underscore GitHub secret. Now, both of these will actually have to get from our provider. So there are multiple OAuth providers you can have. You can have authentication with Google. You can have authentication with Facebook, with, I don't know, Microsoft, whatever you want. We're going to be using GitHub as an example, but all of them are similar because all of them will require you to put this ID and secret authentication variables here. Just the method of how you get them will probably be different. Each service has its own API. You can have multiple authentication providers in the same project, but for GitHub, it's pretty simple. You go to the section of your GitHub account. I'll put this link in the description. It's the developer settings, and you click on a new OAuth app. Then here, you have to give it an application name. So I'll just call it NextAuth tutorial video for my case. Then the homepage URL will be http:/localhost3000. This is obviously because we're running this in development mode, but you should put your website URL over here if you have one. Then application description, I'll just say NextAuth tutorial, but you don't have to put anything, to be honest. And then we'll have here our authorization callback URL, and this one we'll have to put the following. I already have an autocomplete here, but we'll have to put localhost 3000, and then the callback URL path name will be /API/auth/callback/GitHub. This is important because this is what's going to tell the provider how to come back to your website after it's authenticated with GitHub. Now that we created that, let's click register application and we'll be brought to this page over here. This page will contain our client ID and it will also contain our client secrets. Now the client ID, we can already put it over here, but our client secrets, we don't have one. So let's generate a new client secret. It's going to ask us to authenticate using, because I have two-factor authenticator, but if you don't, then you probably won't see this. I'll be back in a second when I put my authentication code. Perfect. As you can see, we now see our client secret. Don't use mine because I'm going to delete this OAuth app after this video is done, but we're going to save this and now we set up our environment variables. Now make sure you use this environment variable names for both the auth GitHub ID and the auth GitHub secret, because with NextAuth version 5, it will automatically infer these two values without you having to actually import them from your environment variables. The library will get them from here because they know that this is the name you put automatically. Now let's go to our website. This, as you can see, is our website as of right now. It's nothing. It basically just has a text. But what we want to do is we want to create an API folder inside of our app folder. This API folder will need to have an auth folder inside of it. And for NextAuth, it's important that you create with the same naming convention as I'm using here, but you have to create a 3.NextAuth folder with a route.ts inside of this. So route.ts. So this is this is how we do it in other versions of NextAuth as well. But this is where we're going to put the API handlers for our authentication. They're going to be automatically generated for us because what we have to do is inside of our app page over here, we're going to actually, let's do it outside. Let's do it over here. So I'm going to create a file called auth.ts. And this file is going to be extremely important because this is where all of our NextAuth configuration is going to exist. So to have that, we need to install the NextAuth library. So to do that, let's import NextAuth from Next-Auth. Then we also want to import the GitHub provider for NextAuth. So I'm going to say GitHub from NextAuth /providers/GitHub. Perfect. Now we want to export a couple functions that are going to be generated for us based on the NextAuth function. Now to generate this instance of NextAuth, we need to pass in the providers that we're going to be using. In this case, we're going to just be using GitHub. So now we just put GitHub like this, and it will automatically infer all of the configuration variables that we created in our environment file automatically for us. Now, this is all going to generate the functions that we're going to be using for authentication in this project. Now, what functions are there? So we're going to have auth, we're going to have handlers, we're going to have sign in, and we're going to have sign out. Now, with these functions, we can come to our API route, the one we created, and we can import the handlers from the auth file. This is going to allow us to export a const, a get, and a post, which is going to be equal to the handlers that we created. This means that this route will be able to take care for our signing in, signing out, and callback handling, whatever we set up for our project. Now, how do we actually have the sign-in functionality inside of our Next.js app? Well, we might want to just add some sign-in functionality inside of our page.tsx, which is what we have over here. Now, let's create here, remove this h1 and add a div tag, and we'll close it as well. And inside of this div tag, we want to display a p tag saying you are not signed in. And then after this, we'll have a button, which is gonna let us sign in with GitHub. Now, this button, we'll keep it simple. We'll keep it like this. But if you want to add the GitHub icon, make it look a little bit better, you can do that as well. I won't do it for this video because this video is functionality based, not UI based. But basically, we want to click on this button and be able to sign into GitHub. All we have to do that is add an on click here and just call directly that sign in function from our auth here. And then we can just pass in the GitHub provider to say that this button will sign in for GitHub. But as you can see, this will give us an error because we have two functionalities that are contradicting to each other. The sign-in function is a server function, and the on-click and a button is a client interaction. So at the top over here, we're going to say that this component will use client. We'll save this, and we might want to put this function into a different file, which is going to contain the use server terminology at the top. So what I like to do is I like to create here a folder called lib, which will have this folder called actions. And inside of this folder, I'm going to have my auth actions. So this is just organization wise. You don't have to separate it like this, but we want to have a file which is going to contain all of the server actions that are related to authentication. At the top of this, we're going to say use server, and we're going to generate two functions, one for login, so we'll say async, and one for logging out. Now, to actually implement them, we'll have to, instead of importing the sign in and sign out functions from the auth file in our home page, we'll actually do that in this actions folder. So we'll paste this over here. We'll also have the sign out. And inside of here, we're going to call the await sign in function. And we'll put the provider as GitHub. And we can also pass in a path in which we will redirect after this is done. So we'll redirect to the home page. Then I'm going to put the same function over here, but we'll actually pass the sign out, and we don't need to pass a GitHub over here. So we'll just sign out, and we'll have these two functions. Now, instead of importing the sign in function, we'll just call the login function, and that error won't appear anymore. So you see that now, if I were to click on sign in with GitHub, it should redirect me to my sign in page for GitHub. It shows the picture of our project. You probably want to put a project icon over here, an application icon, so that it shows over here for you. But we didn't do that. We're going to click on authorized, and it should redirect us back. Now, how do we know that we actually signed in? Well, we're going to have some programmatic things that will show that. It will show our name, our GitHub profile picture, all that kind of stuff. But just for now, since we haven't set up that yet, we should see that in our cookies, now we have a session token and some other information as well. So we kind of know that we actually signed in. So how do we see that? Well, one of the cool things is that we can access the current session of the user who is logged in by utilizing a function that is given to us when we import the auth. When we get the NextAuth instance, it returns this auth function for us. If you're used to NextAuth before this version, this function will give you similar functionalities to what we used to use, the use session hooks or the get server session functions. This will give you similar information. So it will give us access to this session, which is something that we definitely want. So over here, I'm going to say const session is equal to await auth. Now, since we made this component async, we actually should probably move this button elsewhere, because this now has to be a server component for this to be actually asynchronous. So I'm going to create here a components folder, and we're going to create a file called sign in button.tsx. This component is just gonna export the button. So we'll say export const sign in button, and at the top here we're going to make this be a client component. So we'll say use client, and inside of here we're just gonna return the same button we have over here. Perfect. So we'll return this, and then we obviously have to delete this from here. Actually, we'll just replace this with the sign in button. So sign in button, and we have to import this login function and put it over here. Perfect. Now we can turn this into a server component, which makes this be async. And we should be able to see this session being console logged over here. As you can see, we do have a server, a user, and it has information regarding who is logged in, which is me, right? It has my email, my image, and my name. So how do we use that to display some sort of cool UI for us? Well, we know if a user is logged in or not because the session variable will be different. So we'll create a version of this in case there isn't a session user. So in case there is a session user, sorry. So we'll say if session.user is true, then we want to return this UI, which is going to contain a div, and we're going to have an h1 tag, and it will say like NextAuth v5 plus next 15 is the name of the tutorial. And inside of here, we're going to have a p tag saying user signed in with name, and we can get the name of the user by saying session dot user dot name, and you should see that my name appears over here. Now we'll also grab the email, so with email, so we'll say email, and we'll also be able to get our profile picture. So I'm going to create here an image. This is going to be from, we should actually import this from next image. I don't know why I didn't import automatically, but we now did. And the image is just going to be a simple image with the source being the session.user.image. Now we do have to pass in also a width. I'm going to pass in the width of 48 and the height of 48 for us to be able to get a valid height and size. But we also need to pass in an alt for this, which will be the session.user.name, or if that doesn't exist, we'll just pass avatar over here. Now let's close this. It's still giving us an error because image can be actually null. So what we're going to do is we're going to wrap this around with a check to see if it's null. So we'll say if session.user.image is true, then we want to display this. We'll refresh this. Actually, oh yeah, this error is actually because we do need to put the avatars.github user content URL in our next-config.ts. So over here, we want to add the images tag over here, and we'll add the property of domains so we can allow list this domain. So we'll put avatars.github user content.com, and we should see that this now allows the image to be loaded. Yeah, so we get the profile image over here. It doesn't really look like an actual avatar. I can probably just pass in a style and put a border radius of something like 50%, and it will now become a circle, which looks a little bit better. But yeah, this is how you generally set up authentication in your project. Now there's more to this, and this next section is a little bit more advanced. Now the first thing I want to talk about, which is a little bit more advanced, is how do we generate middlewares using NextAuth version 5. So I'm going to create here a file in our project which is going to contain the middleware.ts logic. So what we want to do is we want to import from the next server. So we'll say next-server, and we want to import the next response. Perfect. Then we want to import the type for the next request because we're going to be using it. And then we want to import the auth function that we created from @-auth. Perfect. Now over here, we're going to make a list of routes that we want to protect. So protected routes. And in this tutorial, I'm not going to protect all of the routes. Let's create here, actually I don't have any other routes, I just realized. Let's just protect one route. Let's call it user info. And let's create here a page.tsx for it. Let's imagine that this route is actually going to display the information related to the user. So I'm going to create this page over here. let's say const user info, and I'll be back in a second when I'm done making this component. Okay, perfect. So as you can see, I just generated the user info component, and it's basically all the logic we had on the main page, but I put it directly on a new component. So the image, the information and everything. And on this, on the main page, all we have is a link to that route. So I can click on this and you'll see the information when I will show, but on the user info route. Now, the problem with this is that if I log out, right, we don't have the logout functionality, but let's actually add that somewhere in our project. Let's make a sign out button, which is something we didn't make. So let me copy this, paste it here, call it sign out button. And instead of signing in, obviously, we'll sign out and we'll click the logout function that we created. So we'll say sign out over here. Perfect. And now what I want to have is inside of this page, I want to not only have that button, but I also want to have the sign out button here so we can test something out. So let's click on sign out. When we click this, now we see that we're not signed in and we don't see that information. We see the logic for when the session is null. Now, if I try to go to user info, you guys will see that I still get to this page, even though it doesn't make sense for me to get to this page because the user info route is a route that fully depends on the idea that a session exists, right? And when a user is not logged in, basically it just shows a bunch of info without really showing anything. So what we want is something that is gonna gatekeep this route, and whenever a user who is not authenticated goes here, it will do something because this route is protected. So what we're gonna do is we're going to come to our middleware over here and we're going to set the protected routes list that we're creating equal to all of the routes that we want to have that functionality. In our case, is the user info is one of them. So we'll create that. Then we want to export default async function, and we want to export the middleware function. Now we'll put a request here, and we'll say next request. Perfect. Now inside of here, we're going to create a session variable, and we're going to await the auth function. This is basically going to just give us access to the session whenever we're passing through the middleware. Remember, this is going to run before every route that we go inside. So all we want to do here is check to see if the current route that a user is trying to go into is part of the protected routes list. And if it is, then we check to see if the user session is null. And if it is null, we do something. If it is not null, we let them go through. So how do we do that? Well, let's create a variable called isProtected, which means that it is part of the protected routes list. So we'll say const equals to protected routes dot find, and we'll try to find. So we'll say protected routes dot sum, which will allow us to check if the requested route matches any of the protected routes. We'll get access to the route, and we'll check to see if the path name of the current URL, which we can get by saying const equals to request.nextURL, and we can get the path name. If that path name starts with the route that we are checking, and if it is, then we know that this route is protected. So what do we want to do if it is protected? Well, there's multiple things that we might want to do. In this case, we want to check to see if the route is protected and the session is null. And if it is, let's actually just redirect us to the sign-in page, which is the page where we actually try to sign in with GitHub. So I'm going to say return next response dot redirect to a new URL, and we'll put the API/auth/signin over here. We'll put the request.url here, and this should handle it. In the end, if it's a case where the user is signed in or this isn't a protected route, we technically just want to call the next function, which is, if you're familiar with Node.js and Express, this is how middlewares usually work. When you call the next function from the response, you're basically saying continue forward to go to that route. Now, the only situation in which we want to do something different is if the route that we're trying to access is part of the protected list and the user is not logged in. So let's test to see if this is working. Let's try to go to the user info routes. And as you can see, it automatically redirects us to this page. Now you haven't seen this page before because this page is actually a page that is provided for us automatically when we use the GitHub provider to have this sign in with GitHub functionality that we can just click and then log in. But we can call that sign in with GitHub manually, which is what we did initially. But you don't have to if you don't want to. But as you can see, now we are signed in. And we can just go to that page user info and we'll now be able to see it. So this is how you set up middlewares using NextAuth. Now, the last thing I would want to mention, it's not even going to be part of really the tutorial, is in case you're using an adapter. Now, what is an adapter? Well, an adapter is the thing that connects your application to whatever database or backend system that you want to use to store data for your project. So there's multiple adapters you can use. For example, you can use SQLize, you can use Supabase, you can use Typearm, and specifically, I love using Prisma. So I'm going to show you guys really quick how to use Prisma to set up as an adapter inside of this. If you don't use Prisma or don't care, then you can finish watching the video. But a lot of people use Prisma and it's great for stuff like this. So I recommend sticking around. So if you want to use the Prisma adapter, you need to install the Prisma client library by saying npm install at prisma/client and also the auth/prisma adapter. So if you're using another adapter, you'll install whatever adapter you need /adapter or -adapter. So we'll press enter. We'll also want to install Prisma. I forgot to install it in that command. So we'll say npm install Prisma. Now it's good. Now we'll want to run npx prisma init. And this will basically generate a couple things in our project. It will generate a Prisma folder over here, as you can see, with a schema for our database. And it will also create an .env file with a database URL for your database. Now, I'm not going to show you guys how to create a database URL, or I'm not going to actually, I'll make this agnostic and you can use any type of database system. I like using Postgres, which is what comes with default with Prisma. I have a video that will come out where I'll show you guys how to build all of this, including using a Postgres database for this. But you would fill up and generate your schema in Prisma over here. And when you're done with all of that, you would come back to your Auth.js and you would have to import at the top here from Prisma client. We need to actually say at Prisma -client, and then you'll come over here and you'll import from at Prisma client, and you'll import the Prisma client instance over here, and you'll create an instance of that by saying Prisma is equal to new Prisma client. Then all you have to do to connect this adapter to NextAuth is that you just pass an adapter field and you'll pass the Prisma adapter function that we installed and pass in the Prisma variable that we just created. Now, depending on how you set up your Prisma schema, this will automatically populate tables in your database with the information of the user who's authenticated. One cool thing is that in the NextAuth documentation, they specifically give you already the schema that you need to put to actually authenticate with, to insert data from the authentication. This is it over here. I just opened their documentation. They have one for MySQL, SQLite, MongoDB, and Postgres. You'll have to copy the one that you need for a project and you'll have to put it over here. Now, this doesn't mean that you can only have these tables, right? You can have other tables as well, but you need the tables, especially the model for account and user, or else you'll be having issues when trying to log into your account. Now, the rest from this, you'll generate your schema, you'll add data to your project, and you'll use the arm that you chose inside of your project, and everything should work perfectly. I'm not going to include this in this tutorial again, because this is not the point of it, but I wanted to make this point in the end in case you were wondering how to integrate something like this. Now, thank you so much for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, please leave a like down below below and comment what you want to see next. Subscribe because I'm posting 2 to 3 times a week, and I would massively appreciate it. If you want to check out the code for this tutorial will be in the description. I'm thinking of bringing more Next.js 15 tutorials, so stay tuned if you're interested in that, and including a tutorial where I show you guys how to build a production level application from scratch using Next.js, using NextAuth, using Prisma, Postgres, all of that cool stuff. So stay tuned for that if you're interested. So thank you so much for watching the video, and I see you guys next time.